If there's one piece of wisdom that I can offer you, it's this. Stop blaming yourself for your challenges. You are not the problem. Every day I work with incredible people. They are talented, kind, thoughtful, genuinely a joy to get to know. They also have real struggles. And what I see over and over is this. Instead of recognizing their current challenges are adaptations to the experiences and the circumstances that they've lived through, they decide those challenges mean something is wrong with them. That conclusion is unkind, it's painful, and it pulls them into a familiar cycle of trying to fix themselves through pressure, self-criticism, and strategies that are ineffective. Learning that you aren't the problem, it changes the entire experience of your life. It makes your goals feel reachable again. Not because you suddenly become a different person, but because you stop relating to yourself like you're a failure that needs correcting. You start moving with yourself instead of against yourself. And that is where aligned, unstoppable progress comes from. In this video, I'm going to explain where you might have learned the belief that you're the problem, what that belief costs you, and the 3 things that get easier when you realize it isn't true. Welcome to the You're Not the Problem podcast, where the conversations help you understand your nervous system, your patterns, and the adaptations that have been running your life so you can stop turning on yourself and start standing with yourself. In this space, we tell the truth about unwanted behaviors like emotional eating, overworking, people-pleasing, procrastination, and self-sabotage. We talk about what it's like to live with ongoing stress and overwhelm, how that state shapes your choices, your relationships, and your health, and how to step into a lighter, more grounded, deeply authentic way of living. My hope is that every time you listen, you feel less alone, more compassionate towards your patterns, and more rooted in the truth that you're not the problem, you're the possibility. Let's start with the understanding, where did you learn? Where did we all learn that we're the problem? The belief that we're the problem is sometimes formed in a single moment as a result of an intense experience, but most often it builds over time from subtle and overt messages that offer evidence of perceived not enoughness or brokenness, okay? I've got 10 ways that we learn to adopt this belief. Number 1, we're taught to personalize everything. When people around us were stressed, distant, or unhappy, we learned to assume it must be our fault because that felt safer than admitting we had no control. If the problem is me, then maybe I can fix it, right? And that belief can feel more tolerable than facing unpredictability, inconsistency, or loss. Our nervous system reaches for the story that gives us the most hope or influence, even if that story is painful. That story probably sounds like I'm the problem. And if I can just fix myself, things can change. Or if I do it right, they'll love me. If I stop needing so much, it'll be safer. If I'm impressive, quiet, good, easy, successful, not too loud, not too emotional, then I can earn what I need. The nervous system learned a long time ago that making yourself wrong is safer than facing what you couldn't control. And we bring that into adulthood. Number 2, shame gets mislabeled as motivation. A lot of us learned harshness leads to growth, so the inner critic became a strategy to prevent mistakes, rejection, or disappointment. Number 3, stress changes your perception. When your nervous system is stressed or overwhelmed, the brain becomes threat-focused, and self-blame becomes the simplest story that explains why things feel hard. Number 4, we confuse protective patterns with identity. So instead of saying, oh, I'm reaching for food or my phone, wine, or shopping to cope with life right now, we say, I'm such a loser. And then we use our patterns to prove that we're broken. Number 5, we've been sold a willpower story that ignores biology. Our culture tells us if you wanted enough, you would do it. So when follow-through is hard, we assume we're defective rather than dysregulated or depleted. Number 6, we've tried the usual tools and they didn't work. So when planners and routines and affirmations and self-help don't create change for us, the mind just concludes, well, nothing works for me because I'm the problem. Number 7, comparison makes us look wrong. We compare our internal struggle to someone else's polished outside and then decide we're behind, we're broken, we're missing something essential. Number 8, our environment rewards performance, not regulation. If love, approval, belonging was tied to being productive, easy, or impressive, then normal human limits start to feel like failure. Number 9, we didn't have better language for what was happening, right? If the only labels that were available were lazy, dramatic, too sensitive, broken, we used them. And number 10, we live in a consumer culture that profits from our inadequacy. Marketing depends on convincing us that something's wrong with us, or at least not good enough yet, right? It sells fixes for our yellow teeth, our skin, our body, our energy, our productivity, our parenting, our worthiness, right? And it frames us better as if we purchase something. Now, over time, this can normalize self-doubt and make "I'm the problem" feel like a reasonable conclusion. Ending this self-blame with logic or with affirmations or determination, it doesn't work. You can tell yourself, stop being so hard on yourself, but if your nervous system doesn't believe it, nothing changes. The shame doesn't move. The loop continues because the loop is not just cognitive. It's biological, protective, and it lives in the body. This is one of the reasons I wrote my new book, You're Not the Problem, End the Overwhelm, Restore Energy, and Make Progress That Lasts. I wrote it to give you a new way to understand why you do what you do so you can stop turning on yourself and start standing with yourself. I wrote it to name the survival strategies that masquerade as personal failure so you can recognize the difference between who you are and the adaptations you've been living under. I wrote it to help you stop trying to force change through self-attack, because that approach, it might create short bursts of compliance, but it rarely creates lasting transformation. Are you living under the operating belief, the story that you're the problem? Let's talk about what happens when you think you're the problem. And it's important to be aware of this because when you believe you're the problem, you wear a pair of glasses that show you all the ways you're falling short. And when you can't follow through on a goal, you don't say, let's assess my capacity, my stress load, my internal safety. No, you say, see, you're the problem. When someone is distant, your system doesn't say, oh, people have their own worlds and their own limits. Your system says, what did you do wrong? When you feel anxious, right, you don't naturally think, oh, my body's detecting threat and trying to protect me. You think, why am I like this, right? And when you shut down or numb out, you don't think, oh, my system must be overloaded. You think, I should be stronger than this. Now, I spent the first 4 decades of my life believing I was the problem. I go into a lot more depth in the book, but in a nutshell, I had a lot of challenges early in life that caused me to become an emotional eater, which caused me to become a chubby child. So on top of my early hardships, I was harshly teased. I was put on my first diet at 6 years old. And I developed the belief that I was the problem, and more specifically, that my weight was the problem. My young brain was convinced that every bad thing in my life was my fault. And if I could fix myself, everything would get better. I hated my problem, which was the same as hating myself on some level. I wanted to destroy the part of me that needed to turn to food for comfort and soothing. And wanting to destroy a part of yourself, your fat, your perceived laziness, your people pleaser, your weakness, sets up an inner battle that you can't win. When you start actively taking steps against yourself, right? That's what happens. I woke up every morning berating myself for not having done what I needed to the day before to be fixed. My thoughts and efforts were completely consumed by my unwanted parts and how I could win the war against them. And that left no time, energy, capacity for understanding the part of me that was hurting or understanding why I needed the extra food to care for me. The battle I had created with myself did nothing to help me. That's how it is when you believe you're the problem. The way you approach everything is, I'm broken and need to be fixed or whipped into shape. I need to get my shit together and just do the thing, right? How does it feel to be the problem? Motivating? Inspiring? No, it feels heavy. It feels terrible, like you've been defeated before you can even start. Every effort takes a tremendous amount of courage and support, right? We feel undeserving, and our nervous system stays locked down in stress and overwhelm. And those feelings don't just exist as thoughts. They subconsciously and consciously shape your behavior. You most often act in accordance with how you feel. So if you feel broken, undeserving, not enough, hopeless, and similar emotions, your choices become very limited, and you don't provide compassionate care to yourself. You default to harshness and punishment. You talk meanly to yourself. You go in with all or nothing plans that promise a quick fix. These actions don't produce change or growth. They produce misery. When you're the problem, you act like you're the problem. You flop, you hide, you keep yourself small, you scroll, you eat the ice cream and avoid the things that you want. You decide it's safer not to try because trying and failing hurts more than staying stuck. That's not laziness. It's a nervous system making a reasonable choice based on the state that it's in. When you aren't the problem, you can act from the desire to understand yourself and care for yourself. You believe you deserve good things and positive experiences, not at some point in the future when you've fixed yourself, but right now in this moment. Trying to change from self-respect is very different than trying to change from self-disgust. Trying to change because you want a fuller life feels very different than trying to change because you feel ashamed of who you are. This is one of the core ideas I teach in the book because stress and overwhelm are not just emotional experiences, they are biological states. Your state shapes your access to energy, to motivation, to clarity, to follow through. So the more you tell yourself you're the problem, the more you feed the state that makes change harder. Now, let's talk about the 3 things that get easier when you're no longer the problem. And this lesson is so important because when you release the story that you're the problem, things get easier for you and you're able to follow through on the actions that are aligned and meaningful toward a life that fits you, that excites you. So let's talk about the 3 things that get easier when you remember you're not the problem. Number 1, self-compassion becomes possible when you believe you're not the problem. Compassion feels undeserved when you're the problem, and kindness feels like just letting yourself off the hook, right? The inner critic says, if we be gentle, you won't do better, right? Then you'll really be stuck. But that voice, it may seem mean, but it's actually trying to keep you from getting hurt. A lot of people developed a harsh inner voice because it felt safer than hope. Hope sets you up for disappointment. Harshness feels like control. Harshness feels like you're staying on top of things. In the book, I talk about how the brain shifts into a threat-focused lens when you're under stress. Everything becomes about what is wrong, what is dangerous, what could go badly. That lens does not just focus outward, it turns inward. So you become the project or the problem to solve. What this looked like for me was when I was triggered by stress, overwhelm, feelings of not enoughness or fear, I turned to food to cope with the noise and to try to help my system settle. But no sooner than the food was gone, I'd begin to judge myself for having done the thing I said I wouldn't do anymore. I'd be like, are you kidding me? What's wrong with you? You always do this. You're such a loser. Shorthand, you're the problem, right? Feels like an internal beating, and the system goes tighter and even more stress. So note that I'm demonstrating how this work applied in my life, most specifically how it applied to my challenge with emotional eating, but it works exactly the same way with all the things we think are broken about us or that we want to change. Just substitute emotional eating for anything that's challenging you. Anxiety, overwhelm, procrastination, drugs, alcohol, gambling, scrolling, binge watching, not being successful enough. But as I started to adopt the belief that I wasn't the problem, I was able to engage in a new reality, a new inner conversation, and a new way of treating myself. Of course you want to eat. You're feeling like a failure right now. Of course you want to eat. Your system needs to return to a sense of calm and safety, or you're feeling overwhelmed. Of course you want to feel better in this moment. None of this is bad. You're not bad. And this caring recognition, it's not permission to stay stuck and continue behaviors that are harmful. It's the beginning of support. Support is what creates movement. Think about a scenario you've been in the recent past where you blamed yourself or considered yourself to be the problem, and then say out loud to yourself, given what you've been carrying, Of course, this makes sense. And notice what happens in your body when you say that. Some people feel relief. Some people feel resistance. Some people feel tears. Some people feel nothing. All of that is information. Self-compassion gets easier when you stop trying to change from failure and start trying to change from understanding. It softens shame, and shame is one of the biggest anchors that keeps people in survival mode. Shame says, hide. Compassion says, stay with yourself. And once you can stay with yourself, you can actually work with what is happening, which brings us to the second thing that gets easier. Your patterns become workable when you believe you're not the problem. When you think you are the problem, your patterns look like proof, right? Procrastination becomes proof that you're lazy. Emotional eating becomes proof that you have no self-control. People-pleasing becomes proof that you're weak, right? Shutting down becomes proof that you're broken. The pattern stops being something that you do and it becomes who you are, which is devastating because it makes change feel pointless. If this is who I am, then what's the point of trying? Alternatively, you might convince yourself that you just need to try harder, but the push, hustle, strive approach, that can leave you feeling like you're fighting yourself every day because you are. Working with a pattern, it starts when you stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And you start asking, what is this doing for me? That question, it's not indulgent, it's intelligent. For example, my emotional eating was an attempt to soothe and regulate. Procrastination often makes perfect sense as protection from overwhelm, fear, or the threat of not doing it perfectly. Overworking makes perfect sense as a strategy to earn safety and approval. People-pleasing makes perfect sense as protection from conflict and disconnection. Shutting down often makes perfect sense when your system is overloaded and doesn't have a way to move through what's going on. Once you see the protection, you can turn your attention to what could meet the need productively. And when you realize you're adapted, not the problem, you can stop focusing on the punishment and start focusing on support. You start looking at needs and asking, what could support me right now? And support is not weakness, it's how we change. And that brings us to the third thing that gets easier. Change becomes practical and repeatable. When you believe you're the problem, change, it's drama, right? You reach for the big plans, the big promises, the big resets, the big rules because you're trying to fix something you believe is fundamentally broken and you want it fixed in this very moment. Rarely are you able to follow through on those big plans and promises. And when they collapse, you feel more hopeless, more helpless, which creates the exact behaviors that match the hopelessness and reaffirm that you're the problem. When you realize you're not the problem, you can drop the all or nothing life overhaul in favor of building a ladder from where you are to where you want to be, one steady step at a time. That's how we humans succeed. When you stop trying to change because you're broken, you can start to change because you're worthy of a new experience and because your life matters. You will change because when you have built a relationship with yourself that's based on truth and support and steadiness, you will change because you can go about change in your behavior in a way that respects your capacity. So these three things are the things that become easier when you realize you're not the problem. Self-compassion softens shame, which makes it easier to stay present. Presence makes it possible to understand patterns, which makes them workable. Workable patterns make it possible to take supportive steps. Supportive steps build capacity and energy. Capacity and energy make consistency possible. Consistency brings change. So change becomes easier when you realize you're not the problem. If you want a clear next step, download the free introduction to my book below in the description of this video. It'll give you a foundation for understanding why you get stuck, plus the first practical steps for changing it in a way that's respectful of your nervous system. In addition, be sure to subscribe to the channel to receive more support and resources. And if you know someone who thinks they're the problem, and of course you do, send them this video. Help them grow the "You're Not the Problem" movement, because when enough of us realize this truth, the world will be a different place.